Models for common fractions. Common fractions are half, thirds, quarters, fifths, and eighths. When teaching children about fractions, you always must remember that fractions are equal parts of a whole. You must remember that the numerator is on the top, which shows the shared equal parts of the fractions, and the denominator is on the bottom, which shows the total number of parts. Using different methods to represent fractions by partitioning, which is creating equal parts to the fraction, for example 3 out of 4, or quotient, which is divided, 3 divided by 4, or ratio, which can be represented, for example 3 girls to 4 boys, or 3 boys to 4 girls, depending on your fraction problem. To represent fraction, you can use area models, symbols, or words. It's important to use these as it gives children a better understanding of fractions and how they can be represented. Some of the learning difficulties relating to fractions for children are not understanding that fractions are parts of a whole and that fractions are made up of equal parts. Some children can get confused and have difficulty understanding which shapes can be used to represent the partitioning method of fraction models. Circles are seen as common difficulties with children. Although circles are a good way of representing halves or wholes, it is hard to partition a circle if the fraction that they are shading or creating is sixths or eighths. It needs to be clear to children from the time they start learning about fractions as they can use fractions to be represented in different shapes. Some of the learning objectives for my activity is to understand that the children learn basic fractions, as well as being able to partition fractions in the equal parts. They will also understand that fractions have to have equal parts in order to shade the shape. They will also be understanding how simple fractions can be simplified. The activity I've chosen is Fraction Bingo. I've aimed this at level 3. The children will have practice of shading each fraction, which gives them a visual understanding of what the fraction is and how it can be represented. I've been influenced by Montessori, Skinner and Rogoff's theory, where children learn by doing. So in this activity, it allows children to work out what the fraction is, which fraction it is, and how it can be partitioned and shaded in the shapes that I've provided, as well as practicing already known skills and understanding the skills in group settings and learning off one another. The prior knowledge when learning about fractions is practicing basic fraction partitioning and naming the parts of a fraction. Benchmarks such as understanding if fractions are near 0 or 1, as well as place value and counting, and recognizing the common fractions, for example, halves, eighths, quarters, or even thirds. So my activity that I've chosen, the children will have a grid each like this with all the different shapes, and I've divided all the shapes into equal parts. Some are fifths, some are quarters, some are thirds, some are halves, etc. So the children will roll a die, so it lands on 3, and they'll roll it again, which also lands on 3. So they will write 3 and 3, which is a whole, can be represented as a whole. So they find the shape that is the representation of a whole and they colour it in. So they roll the dice again, so a 2 and a 6. So you must remember to tell the children that the bigger number is always on the bottom, the denominator, and the smaller number is the numerator, so the top. So 2, 6. So you find the box that has 6 in it, so this looks like it has 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you shade 2/6 of that shape. So it shows children a visual understanding of 2/6. You do this again for all your shapes once they're filled out, so 2/6 again, so you find the shape that also has the equal parts of 6 divided, and the children shade in 2. Now if all the shapes are filled out, the empty ones can be used for the children to practice dividing their own fractions into equal parts as well as shading them. But also if they have, for example, they roll 3/6 and there is only a triangle which is a representation of a half, they need to think about, with assistance, how it can be simplified to fill out the last shape on the grid. So this gives a chance for students to divide them equally, as well as practice representing fractions on the grid.